In this video, we're going to take a look at how to use parameters and equations inside of our two-dimensional sketches and our 3D modeling functions of Autodesk Inventor. Here I have the Using Parameters and Equations IPT from our Working Files directory, and I'll begin by starting a new sketch on the XY plane. I'm also going to put in here a 2-point center rectangle. Now I'll define this to be 1.5 by 875. Here I have a fully defined rectangle so far. If I were to tell somebody to come in here and change the length of this part, what is the length? Is the length the 1.5? Or is it 875? Or is it the length of the extrusion that's going to be created by this? I would like to create something a little bit more informative for when I go through design changes, I can communicate properly with my team what is length, what is width, what is depth. So to begin with, I want to view my dimensions as a name or as a function instead. So down at the bottom of my screen, on my status bar, I'm going to change my dimension display to name, and I can see D0 and D1. Well, that doesn't really help me much. How about I change this to expression? There I can see D0 equals 1.5 and D1 equals 7/8. Now when I go to change D0, I can actually rename D0 right inside of this dialog box. I'm going to call this one length equals 1.5. Therefore, it changes D0 to length. Over here, this will be width. Now it's much easier to identify what those are. Maybe width is a function of length. So here I'll double click on width again to modify it. And instead of this being a value of 875, I'll click on length. It puts a length into that box for me. And here I'll divide it by 2. So now whenever length changes from 1.5 to let's say 2, my width automatically updates to reflect that. Next I'll add a circle to the middle and put a dimension on here of 0.75. I would like this to be half my width. So I'm going to change this from D2 to DIA equals width divided by 2. My syntax here shows red, which means invalid. Well, what's invalid about it? It looks correct to me. It's diameter equal, then my width divided by 2. My parameter names are actually case sensitive. So if I go in here and put a capital W, it'll work just fine. Now, some other rules about modifying the names of our parameters. We can't start them with a number, and we can also not have spaces. However, we can do underscores, and that would be acceptable for the names. So over here on diameter, I could do an underscore, but I can't start with a number either, and I can't put a space in there. Over here on the right-hand side of the equation, it's essentially trying to read something. So if my syntax is invalid for what it's trying to read, then it's not going to return a proper result. So there's my diameter equals width divided by 2. If I add a few more circles, say one here, I'll go ahead and constrain these horizontally and equal to each other. Put a dimension on here. This would be SM DIA, or I could actually do lowercase dia because uppercase dia has been taken. I like having it be a little bit more descriptive though. So I'll do SM dia will be equal to dia divided by 3. Next I'll put on a dimensional control here and a dimensional control over here for spacing. Now I want this to be equal to the one on the left hand side. I don't have to give these names all the time. I could just go ahead and select this so it's equal to D4. So as I change this from 0.75 to 0.625, it updates. I want to make sure that throughout all variations that I do this, that this value here is still less than this. So I'd want to have a control that keeps this within the allowable profile of my overall. Now, if I'd like to view where all my parameters are being stored, I can go up here to the FX button on my Quick Access toolbar, or on my Manage tab, I could choose Parameters. This will bring up a box of all the parameters I've utilized. What's nice about this is I can actually change these values right here. So if I want this to be 3 instead of 2 and have that update and see what changes, that's how I can do it. I'll change this to 0.875. So I pretty much had to babysit that value because it's not dependent upon my overall length. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that. Instead of D4 being a value, I'm going to make it equal to my diameter. So if I change this to 4, things will all update accordingly. I'll change that back to 2. I can also add in my own additional parameters before I ever need to use them. Some people will preload equations or preload certain things they will use throughout their design. So here inside my parameters box at the very bottom, I can say add a numeric parameter. Here I'm going to call this one thickness. I'm also going to create another one called fillets. Now fillets will always be my thickness value times 0.25. Now when it comes to thicknesses, I can order this plate in various values that we can order naturally through our procurement system. In order to maintain that I'm ordering a correct thickness and not some thickness we can't buy, what I could do is right-click on this thickness parameter and tell it to make it a multi-value parameter. Now I can add in whatever values I want. So I want this to be orderable in a 0.25 thickness, 0.5, 0.625, 0.875. Of course, I got my 1 already, but also 1.5. I'll click Add, click OK, and now I have a list of values that my thickness could possibly be. I'll do the same thing for length. So here I'll make a length possible of 3, 4, 5, and 6. Say OK to that. And now I can control this in a similar manner. So here changing 3, 4, 6, and I'm identifying the changes are taking place correctly. I'll go back to 3 inches for now and go ahead and close out of this. I'll finish my two-dimensional sketch, begin my extrusion, choose my profile. Now instead of just being an inch for my thickness value, how about I make it equal to that thickness value? I'll just type in thickness, or I could also hit this little arrow to the right and list my named parameters. And I can easily choose thickness. This is a nice benefit in case I forgot my syntax or the exact name of my parameters. I'll go ahead and check mark that. And there's my thickness. Now I'll do my fillets. And I'm going to do all fillets and all rounds. And instead of this being the 0.125, I can choose that little arrow there. Or in my mini toolbar, list parameters, grab fillets. Now I do have some errors in my fillets. That's what I'm getting here. But let me go ahead and approve this. It says 4 of the edges cannot be blended correctly. I'll say OK to that. And it looks like my edges on these circles here are a bit of a problem. So I'm going to go back to my parameters and update my diameter equation for that spacing of those holes to be diameter plus 0.5. That's a little bit too far out there. How about plus 2.5? I'll go back to my fillet command there, make sure I do all fillets and all rounds again, and make sure that stays linked to fillets. Now they update accordingly. I'll go back to my parameters again and change this from thickness by 0.25 to 1.25, make them a little bit smaller. Also change my thickness here and see how all those updates take place. This makes the ability to change your models much easier and much faster when you need to come back to them, or if you create a new variation of your part and need to recreate a new product. What's important to know about parameters, though, and equations that we create, is that you test them to make sure they do what you want them to do. You don't want to have to come in here and change a value and then have it break on you and have to investigate that. So do your due diligence to make sure that it updates in an appropriate manner, and that way you can use parameters and equations effectively inside of Autodesk Inventor.